Wow. Oh, hey there. My name's Ross, and I'm a bit of a nerd for all things nature. So a while ago, I started a passion project called, Nerdy About Nature. It began as social media videos sharing cool fun facts and tidbits of wisdom about the natural world, and has since evolved into this podcast that you're tuning into here. This project serves as a means to inspire, educate, and engage folks with the outdoor world so that we can all become better stewards of it, and so that we can all work together to create a more inclusive, diverse, equitable, and just future for each and every one of us in this world that we all share. Because nature, it's pretty dang neat, you know? I think we should keep it that way. So come on, let's go get nerdy about nature. Come and take a nature walk with me. We're gonna check out some really cool trees. We're gonna hang around and talk about all those things in nature that we can't live without. Let's go get nerdy, yeah, let's get nerdy about nature. Nerdy, yeah, let's get nerdy about nature, baby. Nerdy, yeah, let's get nerdy about nature. Come on, let's get nerdy about nature. Hello there. Welcome everybody to the Nerdy About Nature podcast. My name is Ross. I'm your host. How's everybody doing? How you doing, fellow nerds out there? Everybody staying good, staying well, enjoying the seasonal shift. We're in a bit of a drought here up in Cascadia. It's been pretty cuss, to be honest. The salmon are struggling. A bunch of trees around me right now are just like so red and dry. This cedar here is half dead. It's just all the new growth on it has turned orange, and it's just hurting for some rain. I want to take a moment here and apologize for the delay between these podcast episodes. I realize that it's been a while since my last one, and to be fully honest with you, these podcasts have ended up taking much more time and energy than I initially thought they were going to. When I first started, I was like, oh, I'll do like a podcast a week. It's going to be chill. And then I was like, oh, maybe like every 2 weeks. And now it's like every month would be amazing if I could do that. But I'm still just finding myself overloaded with it in combination with all the other work and videos and everything that I'm doing. So huge thanks to everybody for sticking with me through this, especially to those of you who support this project on Patreon. So if you don't support Nerdy About Nature on Patreon at this point, why not? Like, what's the deal? You're not down? I mean, you're listening to it, so you're obviously like kind of down, but it's just like, it's super easy to support this open education that goes towards shifting our collective societal mindset and the ways that we interact with, view, and value nature, which I feel is a pretty important thing. And all you have to do is go to patreon.com/nerdyboutnature. You can sign up there, and all of that goes towards supporting me in the creation of, all those fun videos that I'm sure you've seen all over Instagram and TikTok, as well as this podcast series where I bring on all sorts of epic guests to talk about all things pertaining to nature. And if I'm able to get to 500 patrons by the end of this year, 2022, I'm going to write and record a hip-hop song all about nature, which is going to be pretty hilarious, pretty ridiculous, most definitely very embarrassing, which means it's going to be internet gold and probably something that you're not going to want to miss out on. So go ahead and sign up at patreon.com/nerdyboutnature. Help support this thing happen. And help embarrass me all over the internet. It's going to be fun. But okay, getting back onto track here, let's talk a little bit about today's guest because I'm super excited to have them on. Today, I'm chatting with Larabee, or Siginaak, who I've had the incredible pleasure of knowing for a few years now. Court is the executive director of a really rad little nonprofit called the Indigenous Life Sport Academy, which is an incredible organization that helps create programming for Indigenous youth to get them out on their ancestral territory in new ways to build connection and community. It's truly powerful, truly amazing, and inspiring stuff. And I am so stoked to share this one with you. Before we get into this, though, I just want to issue a very brief trigger warning because we do talk about some pretty sensitive subjects, including residential schools, the 60 scoop, general alcohol and drug abuse, all sorts of different traumas, and general racism towards Indigenous people, which is something that's never easy to hear, no matter who you are. At the same time, there might be parts of this conversation that might be difficult for some of you to hear for other reasons, addressing things like the type of privilege that comes with the colonization of stolen lands, or the way that privilege is still upheld by certain communities or industries as a means that furthers social and class division, So I just want to take a moment here and remind everybody that it's okay to be uncomfortable sometimes. We're all here in this big old mess of life together here, and the only way that we're going to figure it out is if we get used to just sitting in some mild discomfort from time to time and having these conversations, because this is where we learn and this is where we grow. So let's get into this. Let's hear some different perspectives. Let's think about it all differently so that we can work together to create a better world for us all. Here we go. What's up, bud?
Not too much, Ross.
How are you?
You know what? I'm doing really well.
Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I've been a long-time admirer of not only all of your work, but your podcast. I am happy to be here. And on the beautiful Mamquam River, on the beautiful Skohomish Nation. This is a beautiful place and a beautiful time to be alive.
Right? Isn't it beautiful? Yeah, man, I'm so stoked to have you on. I'm honored to have you featured here. We've been buddies for a while. We've done a couple projects together, but it was about time we just recorded some audio and I guess some video too here and just shot the shit.
We're going to have just two friends chilling down by a beautiful river, so looking forward to it.
Kicking it by the river.
Yeah.
Would you like to kick us off with a little bit of an introduction as to who you are and what you do?
Sure. So my name is Siginaak, which means blackbird in my Anishinaabe culture. Both my parents come from the Lactamlac First Nation, which is just west of Thunder Bay. And I'm proud to call the Whistler and now the Kootenays my home. So I split my time between both areas to take care of some fam and to grow our beautiful nonprofit that some people may already know, but it is the Indigenous Life Sport Academy. So also known as the First Nation Snowboard Team and the ILSA crew for short.
Yeah, ILSA crew. I feel like that's how most people kind of know it.
People just know it as ILSA, the ILSA crew. It's much more cooler to say.
Yeah, and you recently moved out. You're staying in the Kootenays now in Fernie.
Yeah, we expanded our programs out to Nelson, to Fernie, to Kimberley, and to Kicking Horse last season.
Oh, unreal.
So now I'm just out there. The best thing for our programs is to really have our own boots on the ground for the first year or two. Not only to train people correctly, but to teach them the vibe, what we're all about.
Dude, that's so awesome.
Yeah.
So stoked to see the program grow as fast as it has. It feels, because it's been around for a while now. Like, when did it start?
Wow.
So
way back in 2003.
2003. So yeah, this will be your 20th year with it.
This will be. Well,
the 20th year of the program.
The program. It was founded by the amazing Aaron Marchant and a lot of the beautiful people from the Skohomish Nation. And I've been blessed to be with the program. It almost ages me now, but it's now been 15 years of the program. Just started off as a tail gunner, as we call it, just picking up kids and delivering them to the instructor if they fell down, and then ran the Whistler program, and then filled voids with my own leadership, and then ended up running the program. And I've now been the executive director for 11 years.
Yeah, unreal. But just like the last 2 years, I feel like it has just skyrocketed.
It has been. We were cursed originally with pretty low budgets when we were still we were a competitive snowboard team. Our funders wanted to see a bunch of Indigenous kids on podiums with holding medals, and that's what they wanted to fund. And as soon as I and other people on our team decided that, it's time to move away from this competitive model, and we were slowly transitioning away, well, our budget started transitioning faster from us. So as soon as we had an opportunity in 2020 when COVID kicked off, we had money still left in the budget. So we're like, I know exactly what we're going to do with this. So we use that budget left over in our funding to basically take what we were doing, drop competition, and then use our model to introduce skateboarding, rock climbing, mountain biking, hiking, and it's now snowballed to any unstructured sports where you don't need a team, you don't need 5 friends to actually do.
Right.
We're now adding archery. We have aspirations to get into golf programming as well too. Just individual sports that you can do for life. Yeah, it's keep everyone busy. It's something that I always wanted as a youth, and now we're able to provide it for the next generation.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Would you like to give, because I'm very familiar with the program and everything that it has come to be, would you like to just, I guess, very briefly, or not very briefly, as detailed as you want, just overview of the program. What is ILSA, Indigenous Life Sport Academy? Why does it exist? What's the role you play within these communities?
Perfect. So we provide unstructured sports to Indigenous and now in-care youth all throughout Canada. We are not just one of those one-off programs. We don't just bring kids to the mountain and give them rentals for the day and say, you know what, that was a great day. We have a photo. We're going to put it on the wall so everyone knows we're good people. We go beyond that, where we provide the youth a season's pass to the local mountains. We give them all the gear they need from head to toe, boards, bindings, goggles, you name it. And what we do is we give them instruction throughout the year, and we also give them mentoring and training to be whatever they want in the sport. But the biggest thing is that giving them an opportunity to practice the sport even when we're not around. this is something that is really important for us as Indigenous youth and young leaders, and importantly for kids in foster care, because sometimes you're going through things or you've gone through traumas in your life and you just need an escape. This escape can be needed at any point of your day. It could be something that just hits you at random times and you're like, you know what? I'm just going to go ride my skateboard, or you know what? I'm going to grab my bike. And these are the moments that are really creating social change and really helping the physical and, most importantly, the mental health of all of our youth.
Right. So the sport is kind of like the foundation to it, but really it's like about so much more. It's about
so much more. We're no longer just a sports organization. We provide the training to get into guiding and keeping people active. We have people that have graduated from our programs that are now in high political positions. We have people who have graduated from our program that are doctors. We have people that have decided to stay in the sport and now are getting their professional avalanche safety training and guides and you name it. Everyone seems to be taking the lessons that we learn in our programs and applying it to their lives in so many different ways. Our main motto is, if you're not falling, you're not learning. So that can be applied to many different things in life. Just knowing that, just putting yourself out there and having the ability to take a couple hits and get back on up is something that is a life skill that not a lot of people hold nowadays.
Right.
They're scared. They're scared with social medias and being upfront about failure, where people are just scared to fail.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, especially within the public eye on social media, it's like such a thing. Like, I can't imagine being a kid these days, like growing up in this era where you do one thing, you make one mistake, someone catches it on video, and then it's there for seemingly forever. It's going to be so hard to overcome that.
I can't even imagine having cameras when I was younger.
Right. The stupid stuff that it would have captured.
Not to date myself, but yeah,
right.
pre cell phones and pre cell phone cameras is my generation.
Yeah, I mean, and it's so pertinent everywhere you go in society these days. But why Indigenous kids? Like, what's the root there? Like, why does ILSA exist for these kids in these programs? Like, what is the kind of big thing that you're trying to create?
Really giving everyone an equal chance to play on the mountains and play in these different areas. There have been a lot of systems that have been in place for many years trying to assimilate our own cultures, and people have been removed from their lands. There's youth that are here in the Squamish Nation that haven't accessed the mountains that are right in their backyard. So it's really important as an organization, especially Indigenous kids, to have an opportunity to play and to ride with everyone else. It's such a privileged, and I hate to say it, it's a predominantly, upper middle class white sport to get into snowboarding and skiing, because to get to the hill on the weekend, you most certainly probably need a household with both parents in there. You most certainly need transportation that's reliable to get you there. And a lot of these homes and a lot of the systems that were in place have degraded a lot of our community and community members to the point where those systems aren't in place. So it's up to us to really fill that void by providing transportation, to putting gear in the kids' hands to ensure that they can just be like everyone else.
Right. Yeah.
Simple as that.
Right. And I mean, and then you get up to the hill, and like a lift ticket up Whistler is like close to $250 a day now. Like it's impossible. It's so unfeasible for the average person, like especially those within like the middle lower class bracket, to like quote unquote afford to get the privilege to learn how to ski or snowboard. You'd take a family of 4 up there for like a weekend, and so that's like $1,000 a day for ticket, $2,000 for just tickets alone. Not to mention the gear, the transportation, lodging.
I was like checked out.
Dude, it's insane. It's like so unattainable.
Yeah.
And like the era that I grew up in, like we grew up in, like I remember at my home ski resort in Washington, like day tickets were like $43 for like the longest time. And that was like so casual, and like you could ski the whole mountain and still feel like you never fully got the value out of that. It's like it was worth so much more. But now at $250, especially if you're learning and you're spending you're only going to be out there maybe 2 hours, and 90% of that 2 hours you're going to be like in the snow on your ass, like learning, falling. It's impossible.
It is. The barriers are just unbelievable in a lot of these sports. And that's why we decided to expand our programs to helping kids that are in care as well too, because a lot of these foster kids show up with a single backpack, even if that. So it's like, let's put skateboards in their hands. Let's give them access to bikes and to gear for snowboarding and skiing. So we're grabbing the ones that have the most barriers in front of them and the most resistance. We're giving them an opportunity. It's as simple as that. We're trying to provide. Most of us come from the foster care system as well as being Indigenous, so we understand what it's like, and we're just trying to basically be the people that we wanted in our lives when we were younger.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, and especially to do it on, like you're talking about, like mountains in your backyard, like that's like ancestral territory.
Yeah. It should be their given right to play on all these mountains.
Yeah.
If it's like, first of all, to have to have to ask, or to first of all to have to pay to get on your own land is it's sad in many ways.
Yeah. I mean, not to just continue to throw Vail and Whistler under the bus, but it's like, especially to like a white-owned colonist company from America, you're paying $250 a day to use the resort built without your consent on your land to access your mountains. Like, that's insane.
There's in the most diplomatic way to answer that, there's many resorts in the world that are using the same model, and it's unfair for the local communities to not have that proper access.
Totally.
It's mind-blowing, because they're expecting now there's a big push where they can't find foreign workers to run lifts. They can't find people from other countries that would naturally come over here to do the work for cheap. And now they're looking towards the local community, and they're like, well, why wouldn't they want to work at a resort? I'm like, they have no connection to skiing and snowboarding or mountain biking. So if you gave them access as youngsters and to young youth to understand the love of the sport and why we work for dirt cheap in a lot of these resorts, you'd find your employees.
Well, and that goes into like just broader issues within that ski and snowboard culture. It's like, yeah, you can pay people dirt cheap and give them like really horrible employee housing because you have these ski bums who do it for the love of it. But if you have a population that doesn't even know how to do that, then you're not going to have any employees who are willing to like sacrifice all those comforts of like life and like rooming in like a 1-bedroom place with 8 different people in order to like work your job at the ski resort. Like,
yeah, there's no appreciation for shredding the gnar or getting up for the pow days.
Yeah.
when you're literally just trying to find a job that takes you and gives you access to your own ancestral land. It's a system that thankfully a lot of us young leaders in the area are tackling at this moment. A lot of the other nonprofits like Indigenous Women Outdoors and our ILSA crew, it's basically, we're now preparing the next generation of youth to understand the love of the mountains, to understand what it's like to bike on trails, to climb here on the Chief. We're preparing the next generation of our industry for a new bright future.
It's epic.
Yeah, it sounds crazier when I say it. I'm like, oh man, that's what we're doing.
I mean, yeah, it definitely sounds like, when you talk about it, it sounds like a lot bigger, or it sounds really big and grand and almost kind of like out of touch with reality. But like seeing the change firsthand and seeing like what people are experiencing, that is happening. It's crazy.
I'm actually trying to stop use the word crazy, but it's wild to think that
nice alternative.
Yeah, it's a better alternative. It's wild to think that how far we've come and seeing the successes in our own programs, and most importantly, the return rates. It's when we're doing a lot of grant writing, we're required to state like how many people came back the following year, and then all the people we get grants from are just blown away. Like, what do you mean? Like, everyone came back? Like, we're like, why wouldn't they?
Well, coming back, and then with family too. It's like it's become a generational thing now. You have people like Chelsea who started in the program who now have their own kids who are in the program. It's like,
it goes wilder than that. We have 2 separate families that we literally have a grandfather with their kids, all riding on the same day, all a part of the programming, all a part of this beautiful thing that's really representative of our Indigenous families, where it's not just the kids. Like, we ship the kids off to soccer camp or whatever it is. It's like everyone's involved, and that's how we all kind of grow and heal together as well.
And so it started at Whistler, so primarily getting youth from Lil'wat and Squamish Nation.
Yeah, so it started off with 10 youth from the Squamish and the Lil'wat Nation. They rode in Whistler, and they rode at Cypress and Grouse. That's now snowballed into a program. Last year, we had 450 kids in our program. And
just here within the region?
We had 120 kids at Whistler alone last year, which is
huge.
Wild.
Yeah.
Absolutely wild. It's like
That's a small village.
It literally is. And we joke about it. We're starting our own like little Whistler First Nation up there, but we went from being an anomaly on the hill where people are like, wow, like what's going on here? And even we'd bump across like a lot of the resistant stereotypes. We will roll into the line, and some of the people would be like, oh, and then I was like, as role models, we're like, she's trying to keep it cool and like show good restraint for the kids. And that's now changed, where people go, I've heard of you. I love your logo. We've heard all about you. We're from a whole different state in America, and like we're now recognized as the program that's been around for a long time. We have the respect from the community, and it's been a beautiful thing where now we can go into new communities and share that model.
Well, yeah, because you did a couple programs up north too, in Northwest Territories, was it? You've done stuff all over.
We currently have programs running all over the place. We have programs running up in Fort Simpson, all the way up there, with the Witset community, and we've started teams in Nova Scotia, over in the Yukon, Alberta, Ontario, you name it. And a lot of these teams today are still operating and are being operated by their local First Nations now, because we've given them the model, they know what to do, and we've developed the relationships with the local resorts where they can handle it themselves. Everyone's riding, and it's really, over the years, I'd love to actually calculate how many youth and how many communities we've actually activated over the years, but it'd be mind-boggling.
Yeah.
Just need to find more time to do it, or to actually do that work.
I know, and who wants to deal with numbers in their free time?
Not me, but it's a reality of my everyday life.
Yeah.
So
it's just so cool to see that program balloon and like explode across such a wide territory in such a short amount of time. Like you said, just a couple of years ago, you were facing like racist remarks like that, people chanting in the lineup, or you had a story about like some old white privileged person being like upset that you got to go into the ski school line. Like,
oh, that's not even like, when you say person, it's like, it's been people. So it's on more than one occasion, and I have to say dozens now, we work in the same way that other snow schools work. So when there's like a snow school privilege line, we're able to access it because we're part of the programming, just like all the other.
Yeah, just skip the queue.
Yeah, well, it's in most days too. Our team will never actually skip the queue unless it's like on a day that's not that busy. It's outside of holidays. But the whole thing is that these are the same lines that the privileged ski racer groups can use all the time. No one will ever skip a beat. But when these kids with the First Nation snowboard team logo get in the line, we just hear complaint after complaint after complaint saying, how is this fair? How is this fair that these Indigenous kids get to use this line?
And fair is the word used.
Unfair is constantly the word used. But yet, even from being on the inside of the resort, they never hear any complaints in regards to ski racers doing the same thing.
Right.
Yeah. They paid for the privilege, so that's cool. And these kids didn't earn it by living here and owning the land.
Right. Right. Would you feel comfortable? Do you want to talk about like more of like the setting here in Canada and across Turtle Island that like has led to this state? Like how have we created a world where there's a need for a group like ILSA to be created in the first place?
I think just generally the whole climate of Canada in a whole, and I hate to even say Canada because this whole nation that we sit upon is built upon the fact that we were never conquered over any type of war or conquered through any other type of system other than a verbal treaty system. And a lot of the lands that we stand on, like the beautiful land on we're today, have never been conquered in a sense by any type of agreement or treaty. So this isn't like a lot of the European countries where we have a lot of people come from overseas and they go, well, yeah, we were conquered by this and then we're conquered by that. Why don't what's the deal? Well, this area and this whole area that we call Turtle Island has never ever been conquered by war or any other means other than a treaty. And today the whole climate is trying to assimilate everyone into the Western cultures and constant forms of genocide to try to remove not only the Indian from himself, but to understand that our identities was misnamed. We're First Nations, we're Métis, we're Inuit, and we're the rightful holders of this land. And in every sense of the way, they're trying to make us forget that. And as soon as there's no one to put up their hand and say, I'm First Nation and I'm from this land, then it's all theirs to keep. So we've seen multiple forms of genocide. My great-grandparents were in the residential school system. My grandparents were the residential school system. My parents were in the Indian day school system. I myself was a part of the 60 Scoop. So we have 4 direct generations of attempted assimilation, and good on them, good attempts, but they absolutely failed because we're still alive and we're resilient as ever. So we're here and we remember. And we're now in the form of reconnecting with not only our cultures, but we're bringing the youth back on the land to let them know, like, this is yours. And this is the power of our nonprofit, because we're getting the youth who have more self-esteem back onto their land with tools to become leaders within their own community. And we're creating a massive amount of social change just beyond the fact that they can do cool ass tricks on the snowboard as well.
Yeah. And I think that's like a thing that certainly in Canada over the last 5 years, I want to say it's really become prominent. It's the concept of like residential schools. But I mean, in the States, like I'm from the States originally.
Sorry to hear that. It's okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's still referred to as Indians down there, yeah. Indian reservations. And it's like so deep rooted that like a lot of the bands or nations identify as Indian as well, which is like, they're not from India. And down there, like the concepts of, you know, here in Canada, you think about residential schools as like this thing in the past that ended, even though the last one closed down in 1996, was it? Or 1996? 96. There's still residential schools, old residential schools operating to this day currently in the United States. So for a lot of people in the United States who've never had to even think about these issues about like what it means to be an Indigenous person, and having white settlers come over in the name of Jesus Christ, manifest destiny, coming over, conquering this land. It was given to us by God,
just as white saviors,
right? Yeah, and then being assimilated into these different organizations. Like, if you could give me just a rough, like someone who's never heard of this, what is residential school? What was the purpose of residential schools? The purpose
in all of these systems beyond residential schools was to and I think using their own terms was to civilize the savage, to take the First Nations or Indigenous out of that person, to bring them up to their colonial society. Yeah, and that's, like I said, the system plays through to today. The 60 Scoop that I was a part of is a weird play on words, because yeah, it started in the 60s, but it stopped in 1994, and now with a quick investigation of both systems in the States and in here, we have more kids, Indigenous kids, that are in foster care than ever before. So we now still have a system of kids being placed into non-Indigenous homes to civilize them, in a sense, to assimilate them, to bring them into a culture that's not their own.
Right, because with the residential schools, kids were removed, like children were removed from their mothers, their families, from their nations, their homelands, and brought to these Christian organized schools where they weren't allowed to speak their language. They were taught English. They were taught to like dress proper, quote unquote, cut their hair, everything. Like they weren't allowed to have any connection to their roots or their culture in any way. And the 60 Scoop,
same sort of thing. 60 Scoop was basically for my system in particular, taken away at the age of 3 and placed 100 kilometers away from my home to Christian-based homes where we had to go to church 3 times a week. We had to do our best to fit in and to live the lie that is this religious system. And it was so far from our own spiritual practices that it took years, and it's still taking years for me to reconnect with my own culture.
Right. Because your parents or culture that you were living in was seen unfit, quote unquote, by...
We were told immediately, like, you came, it's good that you're here because it would have went badly for you. Your parents are drunks. They're horrible people. They're just not good people, we were told. Well, we always were blessed enough to stay in contact with my biological mom, and then later on in my 30s, I got to meet my father's side of the family, and then there was just a snowball effect of like, man, they were hiding you guys from me the whole entire time. Where it was like, they're like, yeah, like, didn't you get the Christmas presents we sent to you every single Christmas? And I was like, no, I didn't even know what your names were. And it's like, these are the systems that, and it was like they would ship them to like the Children's Aid Society, the ones that would handle the system, and they're just like out the door. But it's we have such a loss of culture nowadays that it's all of us in the same generation that were taken away from our families are now looking well beyond even our grandparents and looking at old archival photos and reading stories from the past. And we're now having this resurgence of true culture, the culture that there's almost like a lost generation where our parents that had to do the Indian day school dealt with all the repercussions of the really heavy residential schools, because our grandparents, it really sucks to say, but they didn't know how to be parents. They didn't know how to love properly. When they were in residential schools, they couldn't use their language. They couldn't hug. They couldn't show any kind of closeness to each other without being abused, either physically, sexually. And these systems that were forced upon them and the abuse that was given to them not only was by the people who ran the churches, but these kids grew up learning that this is what you do. So physical abuse, sexual abuse became rampant within our own cultures because that's what they knew, the only thing they knew. So it's a really dark chapter of our history that we're coming out of, and looking in the eyes of the youth that we're working with now, knowing that they don't have the generation above them holding them down as much is incredibly hopeful for our whole entire world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like, so much of that is just like intergenerational trauma that's been passed on like continually.
Absolutely. And it's so hard to break it. There's traumas within myself that have taken a deep amount of therapy, and will continue for a lifetime to deal with the things that we had to deal with. But it's up to me to stop that cycle and to continue it. So it'll be a lifelong mission, but the kids that I come across and the youth that we teach in our programs aren't going to see the inability to love. They're not going to see someone who's closed off so much that they don't know how to share their feelings with people. So we're there to teach them to be as strong and as vibrant as they can be in life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, even talking about like intergenerational traumas like that, like I think throughout history here in North America, there's never been any signs of like Indigenous people having any sort of issues with substance abuse of any kind. Like, and they're like natural medicines from tobacco and things like that you could use to get quote unquote high. But like the common association with like Indigenous people being alcoholics or drug abusers, like that's not necessarily true. And that's definitely not because of their like cultural background. It's because of the traumas that have been enforced upon them. So it's like when you have that much trauma built up on you, those are just like easy vices to reach to, but it doesn't mean it's not like necessarily because of your background.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess that's where like the weight of the programming that ILSA does is it's giving kids other outlets to like channel that trauma, to heal, to properly like heal and come together?
I think too, it brings spirit back into it, because like we have a holistic model where it's like, yeah, like it's a physical thing to be out in the mountains. It's even emotional to some people. It's a mental thing to get over challenges that are hard. But like to reintroduce spirit into our programming and into each individual person, whether they're a youth or whether they're a leader in our program, is really the magic behind it, because the spirituality was what was most lost during this whole process. The loss of the language, the loss of the connection, and the thankfulness for every day of being here. And the things that we even celebrate today as Indigenous people, a lot of it is it's lack of a better word, just straight up bullshit. It's like, for instance, like bannock, for instance, people are like, oh yeah, that's an Indigenous food. That's like our First Nations food. And well, that's just like, it's mind-boggling once you realize we used to have a passport system where we had to get permission to leave our reserves when we literally had to get like a written note to leave to go hunt, to provide for your family
agent.
By our Indian agent. And during that time, they'd have food delivered. So some of the food that was delivered was heavily infected with insects, for instance. So it was actually some of the beautiful Scottish immigrants at the time, the settlers there, taught them how to fry it in animal grease. And then they have a word, I believe it's called bong. And that was the fry bread that they used in former Scotland days. And that word itself has transferred into bannock here, but it's basically fry bread. They're like, oh, it's like, that's our food. I'm like, well, no, that was a survival thing, because no one wants to eat cockroach grain.
Right. Yeah. That's nuts.
Same thing. Our original tobacco, it's different in every culture. Kinnikinnick was used a lot in the Western cultures out here.
Mm-hmm.
In my culture, the Anishinaabe culture, we would use the inner bark of the red willow. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't even the tobacco plant that we know as today. And a lot of these things were introduced through our settler friends.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So when you say like reintroducing spirituality into these programs, like what exactly are you doing with the kids? Like
we're letting that come out by that's a tricky one, because it's like the reconnection to a land, to an Indigenous person, is something that it happens from the inside out. It's being out there with other Indigenous people, dropping down the walls and being open to an experience creates these spiritual moments. And outside of that, we also try to do, all our coaches are trained in what's in Canada is it's a horrible word, but the Aboriginal coaching module that we have through the iSpark funding here in Canada. We train them, everyone, to understand this holistic model, to focus on the spiritual part of it. And we also do different things. We'll have sweat lodge ceremonies for our youth, and we'll bring in elders to talk specifically about the spirit of the land and the plants that they surround themselves with. And when we go on our hikes, we'll have different discussions of not only like the ethnobotany of the area of using traditional words and what the plants were used for, but really the spirit behind all of it. And during this whole process, we see a revitalization and an interest and a little spark of spirit that grows bigger and bigger in each one of them.
Mm-hmm. And that's such the value of that is so much more deeper and gratifying, but also like a slower thing to earn. Like you have to put your work into it. I feel like a lot of the things today, like people want this instant gratification where you like work the job, you get paid, you buy the thing, instant gratification. You put the photo up, people like it, you get the little adrenaline burst, your instant gratification, So it's like to be able to teach kids at a young age to like slow down, focus on their breath, focus on their surroundings, be present with that, and like kind of understand in a way, like see the I want to say humanity, but it's not humanity. It's just like the connection between all living things on the planet and like where we are. Like,
and it's like the biggest thing really is like letting the kids and the youth and even the young adults know that it's okay to be First Nations. It's now no longer a thing of shame where it's like, for myself in particular, I took up beading. That's really popular in my Anishinaabe culture. And that was my self-care. And that began evolving into my own spiritual practices where I'm connecting with people in my own family that have done that for generations. And it's little practices like that, whether it's weaving or carving, we see more and more youth being okay, and not only being okay, but being proud of being Indigenous. And that is where the spirit really thrives.
Right. I wanted to talk to you about that, actually.
Yeah.
Because you've been beading for, what, just over a year now? 2 years?
It's probably been, I think, a solid year.
Solid year,
I say a solid year because it fills a lot of my time nowadays.
Right. I mean, and it's cool, like, in the multitude of things that you have going on, in addition to being, like, a reality TV star, an actor now, stunt double, you've started this business with your partner, and you're doing beading work. And
yeah, it's a side hustle that's turned into it snowballed into now we're creating beaded pieces for TV shows, and just sharing the love of what we do with a lot of people. So and it's really a form of our own kind of personal, even just reconciliation, and kind of showing what our nation should all be about, because I do my beading, and my partner, she does the leather work and other parts of it to pull together. But we're bringing in our two separate cultures and then working together to create like beautiful pieces. And that's what really Canada and our nation, all across Turtle Nation, should be about. It's not about like us just doing our own thing and everyone else doing their own thing. It's just like, how do we work to create together to create beautiful pieces and beautiful projects? And
yes,
that's in a nutshell. It's kind of the first time that it kind of makes more sense to me, even that's what we're doing.
Yeah, I love that. That's such a beautiful way of saying it too. Because like, what motivated you to get into beading?
Personal stress and near breakdowns.
Yeah.
Like working like 2 careers and doing a multitude of other side jobs turned into me nearly just not giving myself any time. Me time was very few and far between, and I was having trouble sleeping. I was developing depression in a lot of different ways, and I was just like, I have to thank my partner Ali in particular for this, but she comes from such a beautiful art background, and she's such a great artist that she inspired me to say, and I was like, I think that I know it can never be the level of what she does, but I'm like, I think that I can start creating art. And that's where I bought a loom and I watched some YouTube videos and bless YouTube to its fullest extent for most of my learning experiences. But then that just snowballed into, we create hat bands and bracelets and chokers, and now we're getting a lot of commission work.
And I saw that you had, like, one of the first pieces you tried to do was recreating a piece that your grandma had done.
That's exactly it. And thanks for following on that. I have 2 specific pieces that my grandmother had passed down to me, and they were her beaded dancing belt as well as one of her beaded armbands. And I was like, well, if I'm going to start with anything, I'm going to start with something that's closest to my heart. So I redeveloped my Kukums bracelet, and that was what I passed down to my partner as my first ever gift. Because in our culture, even when you do your first hunt, you give away the bounty and the harvest to your family members first. So in the same way, when I first did my first beading project, it was really meaningful to give back that first piece to the person that inspired me to create it in the first place. So yeah, we still have it. It's pretty. I look back on it now, even after a year. I'm like, oh, she must love me if she still thinks that's pretty rad.
Right. Yeah. It's like a child's first art project the parents hold on to forever. Then you look at it when you're an adult. You're like, why do you still have this thing?
You're like, it's cute. I appreciate where you came from.
Right. Yeah. Oh, this lump of clay here. I really love the way that you worded that, like that coming together of like different backgrounds and stuff to create something new, because I think that is like something that really needs to be brought into the limelight more, especially in this day and age today where Canada or BC is like committed to UNDRIP. There's like all sorts of like
loosely
talk, right? Yeah, in the press statements they've committed to it. And there's talk of like reconciliation and land back and decolonization. Like, what does all this mean? Like, what does the term reconciliation mean to you?
Lip service for the rich and famous. I'll be like the truth of it.
Yeah.
And is that reconciliation on the most part is very theatrical. It's something that a lot of people put on a nice show and they just show their support, but the show of the support and in the reality of it isn't that deep. It's very surface level until we get First Nations people stop being tokenized and where they just put them on the platform or put them on the brochures or giving them a little bit of speak, but they're not giving them the full ability to share the power. That's reconciliation, is when people understand and they educate themselves enough where they know that everyone needs a seat at the actual table that makes decisions. We don't, not just sharing the billboard outside of your fancy office.
Mm-hmm. Or having an Indigenous person come in to do a land acknowledgement and then not having them involved in whatever the actual event is.
Well, it's like land acknowledgements in a sense are just so bullshit, where it's like, we acknowledge what we've done and this is not our land. All right, what should we do in this corporate world to keep everyone off their land?
How are the shareholders doing?
Yeah.
Are everybody happy here?
Let's ensure that we still charge all these Indigenous kids to get up and into play into their backyards. It's a wild world we live in, and it's the same way. It's like sometimes people learn from different models. And back in yesteryear, I guess one of the models that's somewhat loosely related is kind of like the women's rights movement, for instance, where it's like, they're like, we need more women in the workplace. Okay, that was great. That was like a first start, but real change never happened until they had female representation at the board and leadership level. The old white males were always so scared to share a piece of the pie. And then they didn't realize that as soon as they had females included, that pie got larger. And now we're in the same scenario where until we have Indigenous and other people of diverse backgrounds a part of the decision making, we're not going to see that pie grow even larger. So there's such a large opportunity, and people are holding on to their straws of their old generational wealth that it's pretty crazy. So.
Well, and generational wealth, this is a thing that kills me here on Turtle Island as well, because the idea of generational wealth is stolen.
Yeah.
It's like you come to a place, you steal the land, you steal the resources, you steal the labor with slave labor, certainly in the States, and then you generate this wealth, and then you boast it like, oh, I come from, like, look at all this wealth we're able to, like, America still boasts itself as, like, the world's wealthiest country, the most powerful. It's like, yeah, because everything that was built that wealth was stolen. Literally, like, the people, the land, the labor, all of it was stolen wealth.
And here's the wildest thing where I see consistently in the one kickback that you always hear is like, well, that wasn't my parents, or that wasn't my grandparents. And people always are really quick to jump to that excuse of, this wasn't my generation. Well, they're also really quick to keep all the different privileges that they've earned and their family have earned throughout these generations. They're quick to dismiss that it wasn't their grandparents, but they're really quick to dismiss the fact that they still live in these systems built by the generations before.
And I think there's a lot of white fragility around that issue, where it's like people see like, oh, but I'm not a wealthy white person. Like I'm not this like Warren Buffett guy that you're talking about, that you're pointing the finger at. But it's like you still live in a system that benefits you based on the color of your skin, based on your likeness to what a successful person has been made through the media. Like you benefit from that subconsciously and in ways that you probably aren't aware of. And that's like a realistic assessment of the situation and the culture that we've created, that we currently live under here.
Absolutely truth, brother.
So can you think of any like good or positive examples of reconciliation where you've seen that kind of like melding like happening? Or where do you see there being potential to do so? Or where are the first steps? Like anything?
Honestly, like it all goes back to the youth movements that are pushing through our nation right now. And it's literally listening to what the youth want. And that's literally, instead of doing land acknowledgements, it's returning the land to the local First Nations. The returning, for instance, we have a large project in Vancouver with the Squamish Nation, which is now the number one invested. I think the Canadian government invested $1 billion to help them do this, but they're returning land to the First Nations, and they're creating a new building development. A lot of people are up against it and have different sides of the coin, but this model of returning the lands to the power of the First Nations and letting them and their economic systems thrive is the most powerful thing to do, because I'm all about partnerships over payouts. And it's like, those are the lasting things when it comes to building a stronger nation together. It's doing it together. It's not just like, no, we gave them a little bit of money, should be good. And it never really kind of bonds our communities in the future, and actually gives the benefit of these economic developments to both sides of the community.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's this idea of like consent in working with Indigenous nations, where it's like you get the consent, which is essentially like the okay to go ahead and do it, but we need more than just consent. There needs to be like full involvement and engagement across all levels of an action or activity.
And it's a lot of miseducation too, because people are like, oh, I got consent. I'm like, who'd you get consent from? Oh, we went to Chief and Council. Well, there's a lot of people who don't understand that the Chief and Council, the elected officials within First Nations, handle the politics and the land use within the nations. Outside of the nations, in their hereditary lands, that's where the hereditary chiefs have calls. So we have conflicting informations where you can get permission from one side of the coin and not have permissions from the other, and it's not really fully consent. So we have a lot of half-assed consent that's happening, and a lot of upset community members, because even their own community is torn on these decisions, and then big projects get pushed through, pipelines get built throughout their backyard, and it's a shame that there isn't enough education and there's not enough people doing Indigenous relations in these corporate worlds, because there's not a lot of Indigenous people like myself that want to use their skill set to work for the evil empire of an oil or gas company.
Right. Yeah, and rightfully so. Like when you've been scarred by something so hard, like why would you go? Yeah,
I've seen a lot of people in that world, and I'm sorry if you're one of my friends and you're in that industry, but they look like complete Muppets, and they just it's so sad to see.
Tell it. That structure you talk about with hereditary governments or councils versus elected councils. Like the elected council was a system put in place that many Indigenous nations inherently don't have any sort of elected council. That was something put into place by the Canadian government up here, so that they had certain people that they knew they could deal with. Mm-hmm. And then just like any political system, there's corruptions and things that gets involved where you get like someone who's like doing it for the wrong reasons because it's going to financially support themselves and their family versus the greater good of the community that they're supposed to be representing. It's just a dirty system.
It's a really dirty system, and there's a little less dirt out in these unceded territories because the hereditary chiefs still have overall claim of the areas. But in any treaty zone, for instance, in Treaty 3 where I'm from, we lost our hereditary chief's power. One of my ancestors was the last hereditary chief of the Fort William First Nation, but as soon as they signed the treaty, they lost all rights to their area. They gave away that inherent right to have first right refusal and everything, and it only came down to the chief and councils in their small reserve systems to have that electoral system. But even saying that without respect and honoring the treaties and understanding that this is still not conquered land, that's still in every right, that land belongs to the First Nations.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's even more insidious when you look at like the way that so many different bands throughout Turtle Island were amalgamated purely because of colonial forces, like dwindling numbers down so low through either like full-on genocidal assault to diseases like smallpox. You have like the Warm Springs Confederation down in Oregon. Like that's a confederation of like different bands that together there aren't enough surviving members to have like their own like population. So they weren't able to maintain any of those like hereditary systems or culture or anything like that. And they've had to like amalgamate to become one thing recognized by this imposter settler government.
Mm-hmm. And that's happened several times where they had to like, one of my former ancestors, Omer Peters, he was one of the founding members of the Ontario Union of Indians. He actually, funny enough, once I learned more about him, he started off doing youth sports and helping his community get into activities, became a leader, realized that all the Ontario chiefs and the communities need to power up together, and they started creating social change. And he was one of the founding members of the Assembly of First Nations. So we're now back into that scenario where you'll have those amalgamated nations, and we have these communities that are gaining strength together. And honestly, I would love to be even observe in my lifetime all of us again in a better system outside of INAC and these other Indian affairs systems. I'd love for us to get together again to push that agenda.
Mm-hmm.
So,
what does that better system look like to you?
Voice beyond generations. I think that with the new youth movements of today and the influence that our youth have and the voice that our elders are regaining within themselves needs to be heard. A lot of our elders and a lot of our people have been so plagued, and rightfully so, by the pain and the hurt by the residential school systems and the day school systems, that this has been their generation to speak up, to let everyone know. Well, the next form of our next generation and what we can be doing as a whole culture is to now, okay, people know what happened, people understand, people are now allies. Well, it's now that we're going to get together and we're going to become a cultural force. We're going to be spiritually stronger, and we're going to follow different nations like the Squamish and the Musqueam nations, and we're going to become economic forces.
Mm-hmm. So going back to that like Squamish land back thing, I hadn't heard of that before. So that's essentially the government of Canada using government taxpayer dollars that was all created on stolen land and giving that to one nation so that they're buying back land from.
They basically are building a large housing project with the help of the Canadian government, and these lands were always used by the Squamish Nation. And they were forcibly pushed out throughout colonial days, and now they're reclaiming that land. It's the Jericho land projects, right by one of the major bridges in Vancouver.
By the iron, right?
Yeah,
Iron
and
Gate.
A lot of the West Side residents are up in arms that these high rises are going in, because it's going to shade over their rich rhododendrons or whatever they got going on there.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, so it's going to be one of the largest and the most densest building projects in all of Vancouver, but it's going to be mainly rental housing. So the accommodation and renting is kind of like housing is one of the biggest issues in Vancouver and in all areas, and the nations themselves are stepping up to be a solution and not waiting for their municipal or provincial governments to do it for them.
And so it's like rental. It's like for people not just within the nation.
Yeah, I believe it's for it's rentals in general. So this is not a project of my own. I'm just an observer from the outside.
Right. Yeah.
But the Squamish Nation themselves are beautiful people to study and to really take a page from, because they've reconnected with their culture and they continue.
For sure. I would also just like to point out a little asterisk there that the Squamish Nation is in a place of, God, I almost said privilege. I mean, in a way, because Vancouver is like one of the wealthiest cities in all of Turtle Island here. And so there's a lot of money and influx, and they have like a lot of land and resources. Mm-hmm. Whereas there are so many other nations in areas where there isn't that demand for real estate or jobs or anything. So there aren't those like economic hubs. So like, yeah, the Squamish Nation is doing great and amazing things, but they also have the ability to, because of like the demand that's been driven here by the settler colonization of these areas, like how do we redistribute that or like get...
I think in an easy sense too, it takes trailblazers to create models that other people can use.
Yeah, fair.
And even using their own quote unquote advantage as a First Nation will be a model that people in Manitoba can use, people in Northwestern Ontario could use to... Now that we have a model that the federal government sees as a benefit, they can jump on and do the same. And it's an opportunity to just simply have, when the trailblazers get ahead, sometimes it takes extra advantage. I myself will speak to my own advantage. Being taken away from my family and living in both worlds has given me an advantage where I understand both sides of the page now. I may have a lot of imposter syndrome, not fully being really, I wouldn't say welcomed, but I don't feel that I fully belong on either side of the coin. I'm kind of caught in between. But that privilege has really gained me the access to be a trailblazer within our own communities when it comes to our youth sports and the different things that we are falling into now. So sometimes it takes a little advantage for others to follow behind.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure of the how it breaks down generationally within families, but you're a hereditary chief, are you not?
I would say I come from, because now in our systems, there's no longer any hereditary chiefs in our families. We have elected officials that come from a long line of elected First Nation chiefs on both sides of my family, and amongst that, within our lineages, is the last hereditary chief of the Fort William First Nation. So, really blessed to understand that. I've always fallen into leadership roles prior to understanding where I came from. But once I understood my family lineage, I'm like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. Well, I always seem to stick my hand up first and to understand, I'm always just trying to fight for our people and do the right thing. And to understand who you are is a powerful thing. It's acknowledging yourself is the most powerful thing that I've ever gave myself.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
So today, there are a lot of terms and words that are thrown around that are very threatening to a lot of people in positions of power, like the term land back.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean to you? And how do you think, I guess, what does land back mean to you?
Land back is, and it's hard to really kind of frame this, but it's bringing truth back to the whole scenario for me. It's just we know from our perspective, it being stolen land and taken away, but it's not even land back. It's more like recognition that it's our land, and then putting the power of that land back into our own hands when it comes to resource extraction, when it comes to extraction, and just use of the land, to have the recreational tenures that are just for use of our own people, where it's that putting that responsibility of the land back into our rightful hands is the only rightful thing to do. Knowing that it's stolen and it's misused for extraction is right now it's really painful. So to stop that pain, to bring back truth to the actual scenario is what it means to me.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, especially by definition, extraction, you're pulling it out of one place and putting it somewhere else, and the intermediary, the middleman, the people doing it are all people who aren't from the lands in the first place. So it's the people making the wealth. Even when you have logging deals and mining deals that are struck, where it's you're going to give 10, 15, maybe 20% of the profits made back to the nation on whose land it is, that's still 80% of the profits in the pockets of the shareholders who own stake in the big corporations, and the CEOs, the people up top who are not from the nation, nor do they have any sort of care or long-term commitment to those lands, those people, to what happens in the future going forward on those lands.
I don't know. It's really easy to get pretty jaded over this whole scenario to really understand the full concept of it. But thankfully, the First Nation and Indigenous cultures in general have a great sense of humor. Because it's the most oppressed cultures across our world always seem to have the best humor when it comes to hard times. And even Chief Keith Matthews from the beautiful Kamloops area, I remember them getting a delivery of dirt when they're building one of their buildings out in their area near the Kamloops residential school, and he just goes, he sees the truck dump and the dirt comes out, and he goes, "Land back, one truck at a time, Court, land back." I was that's hilarious. It's just one literal piece of land back. Yeah. One truckload at a time.
Yeah, that's funny.
But it's progress.
Yeah, I mean, any step forward is better than nothing. So
exactly. As long as we're strong enough to stand on our feet, no matter what direction we're moving in, we're here, we're alive, and we're resilient.
What about the term decolonization?
Oh, so needed.
What does decolonization mean to you?
Just removing systems that were either taught to us or expected of us to assimilate us into a culture that's not of our own. There's different colonial practices that are in play, from the so-called monarchy and the false idols that come from them, and the holders of the land that are still stolen to today, to systems that's basically it's play the game and reap your rewards sort of system. As if you don't play in this colonial system, you'll never make it. There's different ways of decolonizing your lives, from in your home with your families, to decolonizing your business, to decolonizing the entire nation. And it's such a complex, really, topic that we could probably sit here for another couple of weeks discussing how you could possibly do it. But it's really breaking down what systems have been implemented upon us by other nations and by other forms of power, in a sense, that aren't our own, and removing these things from our daily lives.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
When I got here, you had said something about recent news, that something happened recently.
Oh,
pertained to one of those false idols.
Yeah, we have one of the elder monarchy has recently passed, and even Canada, in a sense, has decided to celebrate our colonial past by giving people a break and holidays, when just in the shadow of it, and it's maybe even today that we're listening to it, but we have National Truth and Reconciliation Day, where only a very select few have ability to have a stat holiday, and I believe it's only the federal workers that have it. And some of us in our little circles have even joked, it's like just so like the politicians can take the time off, so they don't have to look at all the people with orange shirts and celebrating Indigenous culture. They can hide off in their fancy homes, their fancy cars, without having to look at the truth of the day.
Yeah. A little bit cynical, but like rightfully so. Like today is the day of mourning for the Queen.
Yeah.
But yeah, like National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. Not everybody gets that day off. Like
no, that's
just one day of the year, and the rest. Yeah.
We have National Indigenous Peoples Day, where we have Christian-based holidays where people get paid time off, and not everyone in Canada is Christian. But one thing that we have in general and we have in common is that we're all on Indigenous land. So if there's any holiday that people should all get off and get their stat pay for, it should be National Indigenous Peoples Day. And it should be something, because if everyone gets it off and gets the benefit of it, you know what? It might turn a couple of people that are a little cynical and they're a little bit, kind of dark towards Indigenous cultures. They might just bring them to the bright side. It's just a little closer.
Right. So that's like a great example of like a way to decolonize it. It's just like rethinking the systems and the structures in which we live in. Yeah.
It's as simple as that. I say simple as that, but it's like when we come to like, we celebrate a lot of things that don't make a lot of sense to a majority of Canadians.
Right. Right.
So let's find the things that we all have in common, and that is the land that we stand upon.
We're living in this colony of the monarchy where you still have the face of the Queen printed on money, the currency we use. The land across the way here, that's Crown land. It's commonly referred to as that, even though like that's Indigenous land. This is all Indigenous land. Why are we calling it Crown land versus public land, private land?
It's not my crown.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, so rethinking those structures is a really key part in moving forward.
Yeah, it's like it's time for us to it sounds like we're disrespecting a lot of things, but it's time to remove the systems that no longer serve us in our future. And those systems that were only in place to civilize and to congregate people into a separate way of thinking, those days are over.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, and it's like so many issues these days. Like I tend to use this analogy with like climate change stuff a lot. Like it's like you walk into a room and there is a big plate of lasagna that spilled all over the floor. And you're like, what the fuck? Who spilled this lasagna? Who made this lasagna? I didn't spill this lasagna. Did you spill the lasagna? We could bicker all we want about who spilled the lasagna, who made the lasagna, where did this lasagna come from? Is it organic lasagna? Is it veggie lasagna? Doesn't matter. At the end of the day, lasagna is on the floor, and now that we're there and we're in the room, we're acknowledging it. It's our responsibility to clean it up, regardless of who made the mess in the first place. So it's like, yeah, we have this shit that exists, and we could sit here and talking about how it came to be all we want, but like we're in the room together. Let's clean it up together and let's do this because like it needs to get done.
That is absolutely beautiful, and it's almost a segue into one of my biggest lessons I've learned in the last almost decade, and that's that working togetherness, where it's Chief Gibby Jacobs, one of the hereditary chiefs from the Squamish Nation. And if anyone who hasn't had the blessed to ever meet this beautiful human, look him up, find him. He is such an awesome human. But he told me one thing that's always stuck with me. He says, Corp, and he sticks out his hand and he holds out his fist. When we come up against something, we have three options. We can fight it. Then he opens his hands in a palm up scenario. He goes, we can wait for a payout. We're going to wait for someone else to do it. And he sticks his hand out in a handshake motion. He's like, or we can work together and get this done. And that was something that's always stuck with me, because being a young sovereign First Nations dude, I was just like, fight. I was angry at everything, angry at the system. And that was me just burning my energy with my fist up. And then I look over and there's a lot of people just not doing anything against the cause, just waiting for something to happen. And I was like, that's the wrong way to do it. Like, you're passively rolling over. And then you see all the young youth and the people running their organizations to help the world, and it's like they got their hand out and they're working with both sides of our communities, and that togetherness will get that lasagna off the floor.
Yeah, there we go. And I think it's important also to recognize that within, like, I love that mindset, and that's beautiful, and I think that's like a really great analogy and way to move forward. But we also live in a world where there are like some really dark colonial systems still at play that see that handshake as an open opportunity to take advantage of somebody. So there's like that element of like fight that still, I think, is there.
That's why you got a firm handshake.
Right. Yeah. You gotta like outpower the handshake. You know when you like meet somebody and they like try to display their manhood by how hard they shake your hand?
Yeah.
It's like, all right.
Yeah,
nice to meet you too.
A whole bunch of toxic masculinity
Right.
that also needs to change. And understanding our culture, you'll understand that we're a matriarchal society. And as men, we're just honored guests in this beautiful world that is owned and empowered by females. Yeah.
Amen to that.
Yeah, we're just watching the women do the great work, and then giving back the power to them is going to be a lifelong mission, because that's, as dudes, we don't always make the most common sense when it comes to decision making.
No, I think that's like a really big thing that has kind of led us to this place where we are. It's almost like there's toxic masculinity on like an individual level, and there's like toxic patriarchy. Oof. And it's like that like has created so many problems where like we've forgotten how to deal with each other and the world around us, the systems, these communities. We've forgotten the heart, the compassion, the like empathy element to it, the
loss of like just emotional connection with not only within the family units, but with each other outside of it. It's really, it breaks down that ability to feel for someone else. It's really sad. I see a lot of cultures that are like, told not to show their feelings and do all this because you have to man up and face the world. This is what we do. This is how you get ahead. I'm like, well, how are you going to get ahead? You're preaching world unity and working together in peace and trying to stop this world from being apocalyptic in many ways. I'm like, you're scared to show your feelings with your neighbor.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's like a really important sentiment these days. Like all of these kind of softer, more finessed, nuanced, typically like feminine emotions and feminine ways of being have been suppressed by that toxic patriarchy that continues to flex that, like, you got to man up and suck it up and do it. And like, I get the origins of it, you know, like I've talked about this previously in like other podcast episodes. Like my grandpa immigrated from Denmark, post-war Denmark, where he like lived in, German occupied Denmark or Nazi occupied Denmark, like catching rabbits and feeding them to Nazis. Like he got his first sip of beer at 15 from a Nazi who like gave him a beer over the fire. Like that's like a hard world to live in. And then you come to this like quote unquote new world. I know it's not new, but like in new opportunities, escaping like poverty and all this like post-war destruction in Europe. Like he fought like hell, like under the guise of the American dream to like, work hard and suck it up and like get it done. And he like, great dude, just recently passed away actually a few months ago. But like,
sorry to hear.
He was like strong as hell, like the strongest guy that I've ever known, but like very emotionally, like just blank face, like talking to him sometimes about anything like emotional or feeling sense was like talking to a brick wall. It's just like you weren't going to get it out of him. And that's fine. That's like kind of the walls that he had to build and put up to like get through those hardships. But I think now as we are in this world here together where we're picking up this lasagna and we're figuring out that like some people have different strengths, you know, some people are better with sponges and spatulas and you can squeegee the remainder in, you know, there's like everybody has different things. And I think like being able to open up about that and like express and be your true self and like, you know, that's I think is a really powerful key to the solutions that we're all looking for across so many different issues that we face today.
Abso-freaking-lutely, brother.
Yeah.
Yes.
You know, I mean, from climate change to social issues to wealth inequalities, like all of it, like just, it's like, yeah, working together and being able to like show up as your true self and express yourself and be comfortable. And again, this is where it's like creating a culture, creating a system where like it allows people to be that way. Like still, like there are so many situations where like you cannot be that because it's just uncomfortable. Like,
yeah. And it's allowing everyone to just be themselves, whether it's like even classifying themselves as like, you know, male or female or whatever it may be. It's just like our world is so beyond that at this point that we have an opportunity to just let people just be themselves. And like once people like on our nonprofit, we started asking all of our youth their pronouns before we began our lessons, and that in itself has been so eye-opening for coming from someone from my generation. I guess you called me like an elder millennial of sorts, being from
elder millennial.
I think that they call people from 82. I'm up there. That eye-opening scenario of just learning, just like, oh, we should be asking this, and activating our youth that represent themselves and want to be seen from their own perspectives has really been so beautiful to see, because I think they would have just been forgot about and not really had the confidence to, you know, express themselves fully because they never really felt fully seen in the scenario. And moving forward and letting everyone just be themselves and, you know, express themselves in any way that they feel right and in a loving and compassionate way is where we need to go.
Right. And I think it's recognizing that fact that like we all have the right to self-determination to like say how we want to be identified, how we want to be addressed, how we want to be and exist. And to me, I feel like that's kind of the gateway drug to like kind of like the broader, more wooey like change. You know, it's like as soon as you can like look past the differences between anybody, whether, you know, you identify as the same sex, color, race, religion, creed, any of that, and recognize the humanity in people. I think that's just one step closer to recognizing the again, the humanity in living things, like the fact that like we're all here doing this, like me and you are human people sitting on this bank here, but these are sedge people. We've got some willow people here, cottonwood people, alder people. Like these are all different people. These are tree people, plant people, animal people, and like we're all in this together.
And that's where that's in our Anishinaabe culture, when we welcome and say hello to everyone, and we say all my relations. It's simply because it's all my relations, even beyond humans. It's our grass, it's the rocks, it's the earth, where everything has a place in what we're welcoming and honoring and what we do in everyday life. So to all of our relations that joined us on this podcast today, it's more than just you and I here. When we first showed up, there was actually a beautiful blue heron that was just in this spot, and it was like, this is the spot.
Yeah, and this is an interesting spot. Actually, halfway during the recording, a kind of older, disgruntled gentleman walking a tiny little white purse dog came through, and you could tell he was a little bit bummed that we were in his like walking space. But like this spot I came here years ago because it was a great hammock spot. There were like more of these alders close here. And it had like a great little pitch that got like some amazing afternoon sun. You could just hang out here and read a book. And then one day I showed up and there was a fireplace right where the camera is, a little fire pit full of hay yalls. And all the trees were like cut at like waist high just by people out here with no respect for the spot, the land, the place, these trees. And, you know, just having a bender slamming hay yalls. And I was like,
it's always the hay yalls.
It is always like, I know nothing of the brand, but like they're always...
I'm sorry if they're connected to any of our brand sponsors, but
what brand sponsors? But it's like, it's always Hey Y'all cans. It's like, who is the Hey Y'all market that's just like, oh yeah, this is a great place to ditch this can.
Yeah.
Like, what are you doing?
These freaking pit vipers and mullets just messing things up.
I'm down with Pit Viper. I won't speak badly on Pit Viper, but Hey Y'all need to get it together. But anyway, it's like, this place is like, it's cool, but like, you can see there's just like, I don't know, there's like ecological trauma here at this spot.
Yeah.
There's like a sewer drain that spits out right here. There's like all sorts of different flood things. And like, these lands have been developed and like worked upon for so long, like the last 150 years, by white settlers who first came here for the logging and then the fishing and then like all sorts of resource extraction. Then eventually more and more people settled, that we've had to kind of find new ways of dealing with it. But like a lot of these landscapes, like I look at this and like, this is still like, this is a little zone in pain where I have like fond memories of like sitting amongst the trees and like looking up and watching the leaves blow of trees that no longer exist because someone decided to get shit-faced on a Friday night.
Yeah, and that's where the really importance of this, our land back discussions go, is because giving the power back to the First Nation doesn't mean that resource extraction will stop. It just means that better land use practices will be implemented. In the area of Fernie, BC, for instance, we have a lot of private land ownership within the area, and they're just fucking clear cutting everything. Absolute destruction. They say they have plans to replant trees in the area, but it's like there's landslides that are happening. There is absolute destruction to the earth. And then they go, oh, it's outside even the private land use. So there's companies like Canwell out there that are just destroying the earth and just moving forward on the corporate dollar. And really, like, anyone who's listening to this podcast, look into them and really understand that we need discussions at the local government level with First Nations to develop these land use codes where clear cutting has to be banned. You can do your forestry work and still keep people employed, but you can't be destroying the earth for future generations at the quick dime of today.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that like gets into a thing too where it's really difficult to create blanket policy across an area and landscape as wide and diverse as Turtle Island, sure, but as small as British Columbia, which is still fucking huge, right? Like every little forest ecosystem is so different in its own way. You can't just say like, okay, in this forest ecosystem, or like you can't just make a blanket statement and say like, no cut blocks bigger than 50 hectares. And then you plot that out, and then it's like different on the coast as it is to here, as it is to interior. Like every kind of forest ecosystem has had its different types of disturbance regimes and stuff. But yeah, it's like, I think going back to decolonization, and it's rethinking the structures and the systems that we live amongst. So where it's like BC Timber still kind of controls the layout of like what is logged, how and where, in order to create jobs for mills to keep people employed, all under the guise of like keeping people employed, right? It always comes back to economic roots. But what we're failing to recognize is that the people, the intermediaries there, the conglomerates that like run these operations, for the most part are for-profit public companies that like operate solely for their shareholders' value, right? So it's like, yeah, they might be working in the community and give a couple jobs back to the community, and they might be following this set of rules to like make good on their parts here, and they might even get consent from the Indigenous nations on whose land it is if they want to. But at the end of the day, all the profit they make is purely to just like make their shareholders happy. And we live in a world where that has been valued to such an extreme that we like cut the corners on every other step of the way. And now we're in a place where we're like, okay, well, let's stop cutting corners. And if we stop cutting these corners, then all of a sudden the shareholders' values are worth nothing because there's no profit. Because we've built this whole system to operate in this way, where we've constantly neglected the people, the resources, the land, the individuals, different species along the way, and we've never had to fully account for the impact of our actions.
Not beyond a single generation at most, and that's where some of the Indigenous teachings, where it's like in the Anishinaabe culture, it's every decision that we make at the level of community and the level of the land itself, we have to ask ourselves, how does this affect the next 7 generations? Where it's like the decisions we making today, whether you know it or not, will far stretch beyond our generation. And if that doesn't pass the sniff test, then that decision doesn't get pushed any further. And back to the quick comment about it's hard to really have a generalized land use code for all of BC because of our different systems that are in place. That's where we really need to rely on each individual nations who've been there since time immemorial to create custom land use codes to do it.
I'm snapping right now for you. Yeah, I mean,
I'm snapping for all the local First Nations to get their shit together and know that UNDRIP is there to help them.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a huge thing, and this is a thing that I mentioned with Sandy the other day too. But like, it's still broader than that, in that like BC Timber Sales still controls how much wood needs to come off in each logging tenure every year, so that they can keep the mills employed. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of like the guys. So it's like it doesn't matter who's behind the saws at some point, they still are cutting the amount of trees, and at the end of the day, the most profitable, easy way to do that is through really irresponsible, ecologically and economically irresponsible logging practices. Absolutely. So bless this new day and age of less paper use in general, because we're looking at a dying business, and there's only so much toilet paper you can get into. Well, paper. Don't even get me started on paper. I feel like every conversation I end up having comes back to forests and stuff at some point.
It's kind of your forte.
The paper industry is almost even worse, man. They're justifying the clear cutting of ancient forests, specifically up north, like old scraggly hemlocks and things that just get turned into toilet paper. And a lot of that, like the pulp paper mill or pulp paper industry here in Canada is like absolutely massive. It's second to logging, second to timber. So it's just like paper is horrible, especially the white fluffy toilet paper that everybody loves to wipe their asses with. Like, that is the worst stuff. No matter what brand you're buying it from, it all comes from old growth pulp made here, either in BC and up in the north, or from boreal forests up in Ontario.
That's where that's going to say in Thunder Bay, there's a large mill right beside the First Nation that's actually been poisoning them for years, and everyone's catching cancer now. But all of that heartache and all that sickness, they're just producing a shit ton of toilet paper for the rest of Canadians to wipe their ass with. Mm-hmm. So,
well, before we start going down that tangent, I think maybe we should just not go down that tangent. But
I think we should push forward and let people have a small taste of our fury.
Right. Yeah. I think. Let me see. Is there anything else that we haven't covered that you'd like to chat about or talk about?
I really wanted to let everyone know how beautiful the video project that we did together is, Riding Red. Everyone can see it on YouTube. It's on the Arc'teryx YouTube page. But it was a multi-year. It started off at the beginning of COVID. It took us 2 years to complete. And that project is so near and dear to our heart, because as an organization, we've done dozens of video and audio and different kind of media projects. And this is one of the ones where I feel that captured us the best. So I wanted to let all your viewers know that they should be hitting up YouTube, hitting up your socials to watch Riding Red. There'll actually be a viewing of it on Truth and Reconciliation Day here in Whistler at the Rainbow Theatre. But hit it up, watch it. It's a beautiful project that we're so happy to have been done with you.
Yeah, thanks, man. I really appreciate that. Again, I'm so honored to have been able to work with you guys on that, like the whole crew. Yeah, I'll throw a link to it in the show notes here so people can like click that and check it out. It's 15 minutes. Great little film though. But yeah, we started filming that was 2020, that first day.
Yeah.
It was the weekend before the world shut down,
literally.
Actually. God, that was so funny. And then pushed back, obviously, because of COVID. We couldn't travel anywhere, but yeah.
It's a wild world and how we've all progressed through it. I think at the beginning of the film, I had like longer hair, and then I was like 40 pounds heavier. Then by the end of it, when we filmed it, I had short hair and I'd lost my weight. It's been a wild world.
Yeah. And then look at you now. Let's talk a little bit about where you are now, because as a result of all the hard work you've been doing with Ilse and everything, you've had some pretty awesome opportunities open up.
Mysteriously lucky in a lot of ways is kind of something that I've been saying nowadays, and kind of the mantra that I've been using. But instead of being a yes man, I've turned into yeah, I can do that kind of person. Which is like
reluctantly like, sure.
It's still shutting down some of the projects, but it's allowing myself to, after the reality TV show, putting myself into random ass scenarios and just having to work through it and different challenges. I said, you know what? The one thing I'm going to take from this opportunity is to put myself in random scenarios that I might feel uncomfortable at first, but I know now I can get through most scenarios. So I most recently put my hand up for they're like, we need some Indigenous people to do some stunt work. And I was like, sure, whatever. I can fall down. If you're not falling, you're not learning, you know? And that work in general has turned into, I got my first ever TV role in a Hilary Swank show that's upcoming called Alaska Daily. And who knows what's going to be in my future, but apparently we might have a budding career in the TV and film industry if I choose to go down that route.
Oh my God, I feel so like I'm sitting next to a star here. I feel like I gave you your first real acting role in a way.
Honestly, I believe you did. So I don't know if I should thank you.
You were just being yourself, though.
Right. In years to come, I'll let you know if I thank you for that or not. But yeah, it's a wild world, going from feeling like you're unseen, coming from my foster care and then just not being seen in general in Thunder Bay as a First Nations person, to now being recognized in the streets and people know about my program or about our program and know what we do on the reality show is pretty fucking wild.
Yeah, and what is the reality show, just for people out there?
Me and my partner were blessed to be on the Amazing Race Canada, so they can follow what we've done throughout that race. It was a great time. If any couple themselves could survive being on that show, and we were quite new on the show. I actually. My partner, I had to actually ask her to be on the show and kind of convince her. She is definitely not her vibe to be on a show like that. So I'm really happy that I was able to do it with her, and I wouldn't change the experience for the world.
What is one of the biggest kind of takeaways you got from it? Because you traveled all over and you said you met with a bunch of different Indigenous nations through Canada.
That was the main thing. Before, I've never been further than Ottawa. And honestly, further east than Ottawa, sorry. And right off the bat, we started off in Montreal and we ended up in New Brunswick. And I got to see like not only the diverse communities that we have across Canada, but I had a first-hand opportunity to meet a lot of the First Nation communities along the way. Mm-hmm. We had a small part in educating and informing the production that we should all be doing land acknowledgements. And even though we just discussed how light those statements are, but it was a movement in a better direction than they ever have before, and are recognizing the people in not only in the communities but the First Nation communities in every place that we stopped was a beautiful moment to see, actually. So I really put my hands up for that production team for really being open for change in the right direction.
Yeah, and I think that is just kind of like maybe even like a great sentiment to kind of like start to wrap up on, is just the fact that like we are at like such a new kind of crossroads in what this quote unquote nation is, this broader nation of so-called Canada. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really cool to see so many people taking the time to have these conversations and listen to these conversations and engage in this in your daily life, and consider like, you know, once you get beyond the initial kind of like guttural scare of like, oh, what do you mean land back, decolonization, what does that mean? You start to understand it. Yeah. I think it opens up a lot of doors for like that constructive growing and working together to create a better world where everybody has, you know, a place or is recognized in that place.
And it's just like the same, and we can fall back on like the my self-care of the beading thing, like we mentioned before. It's just like we all have special skill sets, and once we realize that each one of us and our skills are equal to each other, we can really create some beautiful projects and some meaningful change.
Yeah.
And
that's what the world needs these days.
Well, they need more Rosses in their world. So
come on they need more cards. Where can people go to find out more about ILSA and the work you do?
First of all, our most up-to-date way to follow us is at ILSA Crew, ILSA Crew, on Instagram. You can also find us on Facebook, and we even have a website that needs to be updated once I find some time at lifesportcanada.org.
And if you if people are like reaching out and trying to like get involved or do things, like what kind of avenues or advice would you give to other like settlers or allies or people who want to like help further this mission? Like what can people do to help that?
Whether you work with our organization or not is really up to you, but the first thing to do is reach out to your local First Nation communities, and reach out in particular to the recreation departments. See where, if you have an opportunity to, if you run like a recreational company, or you have ability to teach the youth in any sort of way, reach out to them and offer your services to them. If you don't know how, or you feel uncomfortable to reach out to these communities, reach out to us. We can be the intermediary. We can get you introduced to the communities. We can help run programs for you, but we are really looking nationwide for people who operate skateboard programs, or they're a skateboard instructor. And I'm saying skateboard as this one particular use, but you could be a golf instructor, a snowboard teacher. If you have capacity to have, let's say, 5 to 10 days a year where you want to spend with local youth, we'll help you get started. We'll provide you the model that you need to start activating stuff in your own community, and let's let it snowball from there. And if you're a company that just wants to donate new gear to allow these other communities to grow, we very welcome new and or like great condition gear. Sometimes we're inundated as people just handing off garbage to us.
Right.
No.
Yeah, I know. That drives me nuts. And like, bless people's hearts. I know, like, when as soon as you offer like a charity thing, you're like, oh, I'm taking this gear and giving it to like some kids to get them involved in snow sports. People just see it as an opportunity, like, yes, I don't have to take that shitty pair of skis to the dump anymore. I can give it here and feel like I'm doing a good thing, even though those skis are a liability. Yeah. It's like, you wouldn't click into those. Why are you going to give them to some like kid who's never been on skis before in their life? Like,
yeah. They're like better than nothing. Like, not, come on now.
Yeah, exactly.
Get with it. So whether you're activated person in the community, you're someone, a company has a product to offer, or if you want to support in monetary ways, just reach out. Operational costs are always really high, and it's hard for us to write grants beyond year 2 to keep staff employed. So if you believe in what we do and know that we've been around for now 20 years, kicking butt in the area, support us. And if you're ever in the Vancouver area, we were inducted into the BC Sports Hall of Fame, and you can check out our cool display there as well.
Epic.
Yeah.
I guess in closing note, any advice just in general to people who maybe aren't in the Sea to Sky, just settlers on this land trying to learn more, do better? What would you say to people?
To all my relations out there, just simply don't be afraid to get out and to say the wrong thing or to do the wrong thing. There's a lot of people in all our communities that I meet along the way that are just up against the wall wanting to help, but they're just apprehensive. Sometimes it's only your other peers that are holding you back. The Indigenous people and myself and other people we welcome you to come out and make mistakes, as long as that effort is there and you keep stepping forward. That's how we create true allyship. Right,
as long as your heart's in the right place.
Just keep trying. Get up. If you get up and try again. Yeah. We're here, and we'll appreciate and we'll honor your efforts more than you just being scared. That's not us. If we were scared, we wouldn't be here today.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks for coming on, and
it's a pleasure
chatting with me. Anything else you'd like to add?
No, just the fact that I'm just so blessed to not only to work and play on the beautiful territories, the Skohomish and the Liawat nations, but now we have an office on the beautiful Ktunaxa Nation land in Fernie, and I feel really blessed to be helping and to guiding a new generation to be even greater than when we are today.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, dude.
Thanks, brother.
Appreciate you.
Appreciate you too.
Well, massive thanks again to Court for sitting down with me and opening up and sharing all that he had to share there. And to all of you for joining me and listening to this conversation. I hope you got a lot out of it. I'm going to go ahead and throw some links in the show notes here, links to Indigenous Life Sport Academy, so you can find out more about them and support their work because they're doing amazing things, as well as a link to the short film Court and I did, Writing Red, which you can check out. It's 15 minutes long. It's fun, it's beautiful, it's informative. You might even cry a little bit. It's great. You're going to want to check that out. Now, if you enjoyed this podcast, which I truly hope you did, you can support their production by becoming a Patreon supporter at patreon.com/nerdaboutnature for as little as $1 a month. There's all sorts of sweet perks there, like, stickers and coffee mugs. And again, if I'm able to get to 500 of you by the end of this year, I'm going to spit some hot hip hop fire all about nature that's going to be funny and ridiculous. And it just, that's a great reason to sign up right there, right? So thanks to all of you for tuning into this week's episode. I've got some more episodes lined up ready for you. I've got them already recorded. It's just a matter of me getting the time and energy to basically edit them down and record these intros, outros, get them all polished up and ready for you. So those will be coming your way soon. And until then, I hope you stay busy, active, and engaged in this beautiful, beautiful world we call home. And I hope to catch you outside sometime exploring it. Take care.